The Rip City Drive.
Well, Justin, a lot of different things to cover. I guess let's start with this. Bo Nix, do you think there's a chance he comes back? What are his prospects of jumping to the NFL now? And if he doesn't come back, what's going to be the best avenue for Dan Lanning to replace him?
Yeah, I mean, that's, probably the personnel question of the season right now. I think, that became a much tougher question on Sunday with Dillingham going to ASU. Obviously, they were really close together and had worked together previously, which was a big reason Nix came to Oregon. I don't think Dillingham taking the ASU job completely eliminates Bo Nix from coming back. I know that discussions had been taking place in the last few weeks about a return for him. And the reason being is pretty simple. Bo Nix had a great year, was tremendous to watch. I think he really, earned Duck fans well over this season with how he played and gritting through a couple injuries to kind of finish the season. His NFL prospects, however, just don't look tremendous. It looks like he might be a guy that probably falls in, at best, that third round, but more than likely like a fourth, fifth round range, which really doesn't end up paying a lot. And now with NIL, at the disposal, I think Oregon can do some things there that really maybe gets them close to what he might make in the NFL, might entice him to come back and play another year, potentially up his NFL draft stock. Of course, you can buy the injury insurance as well, so that if anything, bad did happen in the year, he's covered anyway. So, a lot of uncertainties, but at the beginning of the season, I thought for sure he was one and done, and now I'm not so sure that that's the case. And I think that's a really important thing for Dan Lanning this offseason to get handled.
Don't you think that the NIL changes those things around a lot, particularly for quarterbacks? I mean, the going rate for some of these quarterbacks in college now is $1 million or higher. If they could scrape together $1 million, that's better than he could get being drafted in the fourth round.
Absolutely. No, you're exactly right. And, with NIL, that now makes it possible. It now makes it something that, I think you might see more of these guys doing the same thing as Bo Nix. Like, well, I could make the same amount and go play in the NFL. Or I'd come back and have another year and potentially up my draft stock, maybe win a national championship, which is obviously probably going to be the thing Lanning has to sell the most. He's got to build a roster that might compete for a national championship. That's going to help, his chances get Nix back. But yeah, if you could scrape together somewhere around $1 million, maybe $1.5 million, I think Caleb Williams got, about roughly $1.5 million to go to USC last year. Obviously paid off for them, paid off for him. I could see Oregon try and do something similar to that with Bo Nix, and that certainly makes it a lot more enticing for him to return. I do think it's on the table.
We're talking to Justin Hopkins, ScoopDuck here on the Rip City Drive. What about Dillingham's departure? How does that impact Dante Moore?
Yeah, that's, obviously that's the hot topic right now and something that everybody wants to watch. Again, I'll kind of circle back into NIL. I mean, he's obviously a five-star guy, could have gotten a deal at a number of schools. There's no doubt that Oregon made him a deal. I don't know any of the numbers, but, you had to be competitive. He wasn't coming here for free. So I think those are some of the things that kind of now enters in recruiting as well, where, you've got potentially this deal in place, and that's with Oregon. It doesn't have anything to do with Kenny Dillingham. If you're Dante Moore, you're probably looking at the situation and saying, hey, look, I'm going to give Dan Lanning a little bit of leeway here that he's going to make a good hire, and get to know maybe that coach, even though it's a short amount of time, give him a chance. But ultimately, when you kind of have that NIL deal in place, it's really hard to go scrape something together somewhere else real quick. Michigan State was the other school that, was really kind of in the mix here lately. They were making a push. They really didn't have that good of a season. So, I don't know that, that's a great option for him. And most of the upper-end colleges have a quarterback already committed in this class. So I think Oregon's going to be okay there. Of course, nothing's ever certain until it's signed on the dotted line, which will be in a few weeks. But I think at least for right now, the panic level is low in regards to Dante Moore.
Justin, I'm curious, with Dillingham leaving, are you hearing any names yet on a new OC? What's it look like?
Yeah, here's what I can say. So this is kind of a fun one, right? So we're used to covering these things with Mario Cristobal, being the head coach at Oregon. And Mario Cristobal, he would go through the process and take a long time to make his hires. We all recall that. It could be 3-5 weeks, before he would make a hire. Dan Lanning doesn't really operate that same way. He made his hires within a couple weeks while also, double dutying at Georgia trying to win a national championship when he took the job. He works much quicker. This development with Dillingham going to ASU didn't catch him by surprise Sunday morning. It's something that had been discussed between the two and well known for at least a couple weeks. So as far as planning goes there, I think he was pretty proactive. What I can say is this, however, Dan Lanning does a really good job of keeping, names really close to the vest in coaching searches. And it doesn't appear as though he's really reached out to much of the staff to gauge interest in who they like. So names have been hard. I've posted a few on my site. I think there's some guys that are pretty obvious out there. Maybe Spavital, who just didn't get to or just got fired from Texas State. You look, and there's Dickey that just got fired from Texas A&M. These are guys. The reason I mention them is they have some crossover with that Mike Norvell tree, that Mike Norvell system that Kenny Dillingham brought over. I think that's something that potentially Coach Lanning's going to want to stick with and try to have that continuity. If he does decide to go outside of it, I think you got to look at a home run hire. Say, hey, if we're going to change our system, it's got to be a home run guy. And right now, the only couple of home run guys that I could think of that are available are Dan Mullen and Joe Brady, who are currently, Joe Brady's with the Buffalo Bills, but Dan Mullen's just currently doing analyst work on TV. And the other part about that with this search, with the signing period coming up in a few weeks, you need to get your guy in place, and it's got to be somebody that can probably come and help you right now. So I think that's a little bit of an issue. You don't go look at like an Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State and look at their coaches, because those guys are going to be busy for a few weeks, and that makes that a little difficult.
That's great insight. Justin Hopkins, ScoopDuck here on the Rip City Drive. A lot of frustration with the defense. So I'll ask you this. Is it just talent needing to have more recruiting cycles under Lanning? Is it the fact the guys have been under multiple systems over the last few years with the turnover? What's your take on what we saw defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear one thing. I think there's a number of issues. And first of all, I think a lot of folks are wondering if Tosh Lupoy is the guy, right? He's at Alabama. Those play calling duties got stripped from him there, so we know that wasn't successful. But we also know coaches can improve, right? We got to give them the benefit of the doubt there, and it's been several years since that took place. If most fans, most media, everybody's kind of wondering if Tosh Lupoy is the guy. I wonder the same thing. Dan Lanning knows the answer. And one of the things I wrote about following the loss to Oregon State is if you're Dan Lanning, you've got a couple big tests ahead of you. You've got to obviously be able to go out and nail this offensive coordinator hire because you're a defensive-minded coach. He leaned on Kenny Dillingham to lead the offense and did a great job there. He needs another guy to do that. Secondly, you got to go look at this defense and figure out how to fix it. I think it was very telling that your best defensive players on this roster this year were all transfers. Christian Gonzalez was a transfer. Casey Rogers, who had a tremendous, a couple weeks down the stretch there, was a transfer. Bennett Williams was in and out and did pretty well. Noah Sewell kind of came back to life there at the last couple of weeks, but ultimately, when you brought those transfers in, they made a huge difference. That, to me, really shows that there were some holes on this defense that does need to get fixed in recruiting, that does need to get fixed through development. It certainly seems that one of the things that might have happened is some of these guys either weren't getting developed or weren't properly evaluated out of high school and might not be the player that you think they are. So, again, I do expect on the heels of that, you might ask me about this, I don't know. On the heels of that, I do expect Oregon to be very active in the transfer portal once again, because I think Dan Lanning is going to really want to shore up that side of the ball and plug some holes.
I'm kind of curious, Justin, whether you have a feel for this or not, or whether it's possible to tell. But Lanning is a defensive guy. And I've wondered how much of this defense was him and how much was the DC. And you always wonder about that, and it's hard to tell. But I would assume Lanning had a lot of input on what they did defensively, right? I believe from, what I've been told, he probably
had less input on it than we would like to believe. I mean, I'd like to think that, Lanning's the guy, and everybody I've talked to that knows him or has coached with him said he's a defensive genius, and they've used the word genius. He's the equivalent of Chip Kelly on the defensive side of the ball. So, you do really wonder how much of input did he have there. You're paying Tosh Lupoy over $1.5 million a year to come and coach that defense. Are you really counting on him to get it done for, what he's making as a salary? Or again, these are great questions. I don't believe that Dan Lanning had as much input in there as we'd like to believe, but I could be totally wrong there. And I certainly think that this is going to be the most fascinating part of the team next year, is kind of watching what happens with the defense in the spring, seeing if there's improvements, because this is something that, at least on ScoopDuck, I wrote about. The offense, in the spring and in the fall, in fall camp before they played a game, was really having its way with the defense. And so you start to wonder, okay, is our offense really good? Is our defense really bad? Is it both? And it certainly looked as though we got to do the sample size of a season that it was probably a little bit of both. The offense was pretty good and the defense was pretty bad. So this is definitely a really big test for Dan Lanning this offseason for sure.
All right, last thing for you, things that we should keep an eye on as we approach the early signing period, recruiting news and different things they're looking to attack.
Yeah, I mean, December 5th is the first day officially that the transfer portal activates. And I think that's besides an offensive coordinator hire, I think that's the number one thing you're looking for next is, okay, which players from Oregon leave, which players from other schools, possibly Georgia or Texas A&M, where Oregon's got ties in as well through coaching, which of those guys jump in the portal that Oregon might get after and try to bring to Oregon. I think that's kind of the real next big talking point. After that, it'll be the early signing period in recruiting, which is the third Wednesday of December. So that'll be next. Those are the things you want to see. And then somewhere in the middle there is kind of the decision of Bo Nix. What does he do? How does he return? All these things, I feel like I'm, spitting some hyperbole, but it really feels as though if Bo Nix comes back and the offensive coordinator hire is a good hire, I think they're going to be active enough in the transfer portal, along with who they've currently got committed and will sign in a few weeks, that you could be looking at an Oregon team that might seriously make a playoff run next year. The schedule currently, allows for that, and is a much easier schedule next year than it was this year. So I think that there's a really, really big emphasis and push to be, very active in this next month to get all those pieces in place so that in the spring you've got the guys you need. You've got Bo Nix, you've got your offensive coordinator, whatever the case might be, and you're off and running. I think there's a really big push there for that. And the reason I say that is I know Phil Knight's been very, active in really trying to help promote that through NIL and other things. So I believe that there's the makings of becoming a special season for Oregon next year. All
right, Duck fans, you just heard the clinic. ScoopDuck.com is your place to go for all of your Ducks information. He is the owner of ScoopDuck, Justin Hopkins, on Twitter at JHopkinsSD. Give him a follow. Hey, Justin, great to catch up with you. Always love having you on the show, and we'll catch up soon, buddy.
I love it. Let's do it again.